Chances are you've only seen the water levels in the John Street area this high in pictures. This is thanks to the hard work constantly being put in by the Sault Ste. Marie Region Conservation Authority to maintain watershed conditions.
Watershed conditions are extremely important for public safety. If there's lots of snow and we get a lot of rain, we're going to have a fast melt, and that water is going to go right in the water courses, which is going to could be a huge problem, and it could be flooding. So our job is to attempt to figure out how much water's coming in, when it's going to be there, and when the streams are going to peak, so that we send out different kinds of messages depending on the water conditions. And that's basically telling everybody what kind of conditions we have and whether flooding is anticipated and that kind of thing. Biggest thing is to stay away from the water courses, especially when there is precipitation, or in the spring when the ground's wet. It's slippery, people can fall, especially children. You want to keep them away from the water courses. It's one thing playing in a puddle, it's a totally different thing playing, by a creek, side of a creek.
As the snow starts to melt, the Conservation Authority is also responsible to take samples to better forecast upcoming watershed conditions.
We measure the depth of the snow at 6 different locations in 10 different spots at each location, from the east end of town to the far west end of town, to come up with the weight and the final weight and the depth of the snow and the water content of the ground and the crust conditions. So we can gather the information so they can forecast what kind of weather we're going to have in the spring and the flood conditions that are a big possibility of.
For times when flood conditions are high, there are channels across the city to help keep the running water controlled.
We have 5 different flood control channels across the city, and they help divert water out of flood-prone neighborhoods, and they've been built in such a way that they can absorb a regional storm, so that if we do have heavy rainfalls, that water is going into those channels and away from homes and businesses. One of the main channels that we're going to see is the East Avignon, and it's quite unique. I really like it because it's in the center of the city, and people know it's there, and it doesn't necessarily look like a flood control channel, except in certain areas, but in other areas it doesn't. It looks like just a naturalized channel. And the main feature, and one of the reasons that the Sault Ste. Marie Region Conservation Authority actually exists, is because of Fort Creek and the flooding that historically always happened in that area. So the Fort Creek Dam was built as a flood diversion. So it's a reservoir, and we have control of the amount of water that actually flows out of the reservoir into Fort Creek itself.
On top of the flood channels in town, there are natural channels that also help in monitoring flood conditions, one of them being the Root River, which is usually reduced to a trickle by summer.
And there are gauging stations on 2 rivers in Sault Ste. Marie. Both of them are naturalized rivers, so they're not flood control channels. And we use the gauges to see what the water flow and levels are within the rivers, and then that information feeds into our calculations to see when we'll have peak flows during this time of year.
For up-to-date information on our watershed conditions and to learn more about the city's flood control initiatives, visit ssmrca.ca. For Shaw TV, I'm Christian LeMay.